Chapter 23, Sanctuary Lost. A loud hum, a brilliant flash of light, and Uracil tumbling into the marble courtyard signalled the group's return to the four gates. Having been spat out by the monolith, Uracil's tumble ended with him lying on his back, legs in the air, propped up against the obelisk at the centre of the compass. Just at that moment, Greg walked past. He was from Eastgate and had little time for Uracil, and even less since Uracil's mucus had covered his arm, releasing a field mouse which had proceeded to scamper all over him. The pitch of his scream at the incident had been particularly embarrassing, and Greg was still desperately trying to live it down. As he walked past, Uracil made a flapping gesture for help. Greg looked down at Uracil with disdain and threw a towel in his face. Uracil could hear the echoing boom of Gio's laughter as he made his way towards his hapless friend. Before Gio could utter a word of sarcasm, Uracil folded his arms and looked away. "No, don't help me. I can get up on my own, thank you very much." "All right then," replied Gio cheerily. "I'm going to have a sandwich." Without so much as a passing glance, he walked on by with a spring in his step, off in search of food. Freya and Requiem emerged from the monolith together. Uracil made another flapping gesture in Freya's direction, but she was too preoccupied to notice. Instead, she watched Gio ambling off into the distance as he whistled at the top of his lungs. Turning to Requiem, she spoke in a distracted, almost saddened tone. "Gio's got a point. I think we should all go back to our sanctuaries and recover." Requiem, also preoccupied, simply nodded at Freya's comment, apparently missing her tone and downcast expression. Of this, Freya was glad, as she had no desire to explain what was troubling her. Silently, she headed off to Eastgate, leaving a bemused Uracil to watch her fade into the bustle of the courtyard. He finally brought himself to look up at Requiem, giving him a timid smile. In response, Requiem flicked his wrist violently and raised his arm to cast Uracil somersaulting into the air. Looking as though he was going to land belly first on the tip of the obelisk, Uracil managed to turn it into a slide before flipping himself over and gliding, oddly gracefully, feet first down to the ground. "At least you're upright, I suppose," said Requiem. "Try not to sit there all day. I'm sure the council doesn't want their lofty position pointed to by a child's slide." "Right you are," said Uracil, as he struggled to his feet. Unfortunately, all the tumbling had made him quite dizzy, and he slipped on the slide and fell back in a heap. Looking on in anguish, Requiem asked the heavens, "Why do I bother?" "I find that giving someone a simple helping hand is often all that is needed," crackled an old voice. Requiem turned to see Erebus helping Uracil to his feet. "Thank you," was all that a very bashful Uracil could muster as he straightened his robes and made a hasty exit. Turning to Requiem, Erebus continued, "You see, no fancy power or tricks, a simple hand of friendship was the best remedy." "I'll try to remember that," said Requiem, as he peered suspiciously at Erebus, trying to read between the lines. Good, replied Erebus, glad to see Requiem's analytical glare. "I trust you remember your time away and are ready to report." Requiem's heart skipped a beat at the thought of explaining all that had happened, and turned away from Erebus's innocent, yet probing, gaze. "I must go to my sanctuary to gather my thoughts." "Very well, Requiem. We look forward to seeing you later," said Erebus cheerily, seemingly unconcerned by Requiem's change in demeanour. Erebus turned the slide into steps, walked to the top, stepped off, and disappeared. Requiem cast his eyes up to the ivory tower as the steps turned back into an obelisk. With a sick feeling in the pit of his stomach, he made his way to the northeast corner. In the depths of the dark alleyway, Requiem pulled out his platinum pocket watch and released the Storm Dragon. The filing cabinet-sized black bricks flew out of the wall and span around him as they always did. Although thoroughly preoccupied, he noticed that the bricks were taking an unusually long time to disappear. They also seemed to be further away than usual. Then it struck him. The bricks had gone. The white torrent of air and dust amidst a background of black were not the bricks of the alleyway. They were the remains of his sanctuary. Requiem stood alone in the void that was once his home, all the matter turned to dust, all the energy to wind, and all the time tearing around him. He was simultaneously distraught, stunned, and angry. His mind was as empty as the darkness and as muddled as the wind. He just stood there, staring on, not thinking, not knowing, simply lost. Back in the Four Gates, Kyo had decided not to go to his sanctuary after all, but, instead, to have the sandwich he declared he would, sitting in the shade of a cherry blossom tree, with Klein in North Gate, watching the garden waft in the breeze. A modestly dressed man in traditional Japanese attire walked up beside Kyo. Speaking with a wise reverence, as he too gazed out at the garden, he said, "The moment is all we need." Kyo jumped and scared Klein into moving all of 2 inches before falling asleep again. As long as there are sandwiches in the moment, I'm all for it. Kyo looked up at the man and gulped down his large mouthful of food before attempting to scrabble to his feet and bow. "Master Genbu, Genbu put his hand on Kyo's shoulder and gently sat him back down under the tree. Klein looked most unimpressed that his sleep had been disturbed once again, but as soon as Kyo's lap was free, he made himself comfortable and was once more dreaming of a la carte menus. "You didn't notice me as I am the balance," continued Genbu. "I am not overt, nor am I a shrinking violet. I am simply here, now, and demand nothing of the moment. That is what our way dictates." Genbu chuckled to himself. "If you had noticed me, I wouldn't be setting a very good example to my people now, would I?" This was supposed to ease Kyo's embarrassment at not noticing the head of North Gate standing beside him, but it still wasn't enough to allow him to finish his sandwich. "You can afford to stand out. People wouldn't think it improper or wrong. You're our leader, after all." "Ah, yes, but to demand something of the moment is to miss what it is offering. By not standing out, I get to walk freely amongst my people, listen to them, and watch them enjoy. I get to experience the truth. Do you think I would get the same response if I were garbed in elaborate clothing?" "Well, no, but we wouldn't lie to you either, I'd expect." "Perhaps, but not speaking openly is often as misleading as telling a lie. Many find it hard to say what they really think to people whom they perceive as more important than they." "True," replied Kyo, as he forgot himself and bit into his sandwich while staring out at the garden. Genbu raised an eyebrow. "What about you, Kyo? Will you speak openly to me?" Kyo swallowed hard, and without looking up, replied confidently, "Yes." Genbu groaned as he sat down on the grass and leaned against the tree with his back to Kyo, so as not to remind him that he was talking to his leader. Once comfortable, Genbu asked, "Tell me, Kyo, give me the first answer that comes into your head. What worries you?" Genbu barely had time to draw breath as Kyo fired back his answer without hesitation. "That I bit into my sandwich in front of my leader and mustard dripped onto my top. I must look like a disrespectful fat oaf to you, and that worries me deeply." Genbu rested his head back on the tree and beamed a great smile of silent relief. Kyo was not worried about the actions of Requiem and what would unfold. He was not worried about any plans Akuma may be hatching. He was completely wrapped up in the now, and nothing was bad enough to distract him from it. This brought a great feeling of optimism to Genbu. He knew that as long as Kyo, who was closest to Requiem and had suffered Akuma firsthand, was still in the moment, then things were not that bad. Kyo, on the other hand, was taking Genbu's silence as a very bad sign indeed, and tried to rise to his feet to apologize. Genbu held out his arm to catch Kyo's shoulder. "Sit, my friend. Enjoy the garden. Your worries are unfounded. I think you are a great man." Kyo sat stunned against the tree. He mouthed the words "friend" and "great man" to Klein in utter disbelief and rapture. "Master Genbu?" But Genbu had gone, as anonymously as he had arrived. Klein began treading Gio's lap and flicking him in the face with his tail for waking him up a third time. With a newfound pride, Gio leaned back and resumed his enjoyment of the moment with Klein asleep on his lap and sandwich in hand. Freya had not got as far as her sanctuary either. She hadn't even got as far as Gio. She was sitting on a marble bench in the courtyard. To passers-by, she looked dazed, but she didn't care. She was aware enough of her surroundings. What she was more concerned with was what had been happening to her and the others. She was going over every step in exquisite detail, trying to work out what was happening, what she should do and what she couldn't, or perhaps shouldn't, prevent. A commotion in the courtyard vaguely registered in Freya's consciousness. However, as it was not the debilitating fear that Akuma produced with every footstep, she paid little attention. A confident, well-spoken voice filled the air. "May I sit here?" Just like Gio before her, Freya didn't move to gauge who it was beside her, and simply replied, "It's a free bench. Even if you're Akuma, I couldn't stop you from sitting on it." "Then you are brave indeed," said the man as he sat. "Not only would you share a bench with the demon lord, but you speak flippantly of him in the openness of the courtyard." Freya was still lost in her own thoughts as she replied without looking at the man. "It's not flippancy, merely fact. I am not saying anything against Akuma, or any others from Southgate for that matter. They are still our people, and we are equals." "What if they don't want to be equals? What then?" "Are you trying to stir things?" Freya stopped mid-sentence as she turned to find Volt, leader of Eastgate, sitting beside her. Freya bowed her head in shame. "I'm so sorry. I didn't realise it was you, Lord Volt. I would never have—" "Enough, Freya. I do not want your apologies. I want your answers," replied Volt sternly, resting on his simple black cane and looking out at the ever-distancing crowd. Looking down at her knees, Freya gave the only reply she could. "The Four Gates is built on equals. No one gate or person can rule outright, so, in answer to your question, they would have to be stopped." Freya clenched her fists as her words brought on a sickening feeling. She was sure Volt was asking about Requiem, and she felt as if she had betrayed her friend in what she had said. Volt, although a stern leader, was a kind and understanding man, although people couldn't always see beyond his ability to command and get things done. Many of the accomplishments of the East Gate, although not his own invention, would not have succeeded without his organisation and leadership. In fact, to some, he was not a man but a calculating machine, which is why Freya's heart nearly stopped at the prospect of what he had to say next. "Do not worry. I would not ask you to do anything to Requiem. It wouldn't be right. For what it's worth, I don't think he's all that bad. He's just untamed and a little reckless with his raw power. I think you could be of great help taming the beast inside of him." He turned to Freya and looked meaningfully into her eyes. "One day I may need my strongest and most effective to stand against Akuma, if he should step out of line. You are one of those people." Freya looked up at Volt, trying her hardest to hold back the tears of joy and relief at all the things he had said. "You can count on me." "Thank you, Freya." Rising to his feet, Volt added, "I must be leaving now. Please stay with Requiem. For all our technology and science, you are probably our best hope at keeping his power from doing harm." As Volt strode off, Freya called out, "For what it's worth, if it came to the crunch, I think you could count on Requiem being on the front line too." Volt turned slightly and gave a slow nod with a half smile before vanishing into the crowd with a swish of his cloak. Urasil was the only one to actually make it to his sanctuary, and was in the Scottish wing of his house, a modest castle set in a wood overlooking a loch. It held Urasil's private library, which he was now scuttling around looking frantically for books to help him solve the mystery of the fifth gate. The wind and rain beat heavily on his stained glass window. "Not that one. Not that one either," muttered Urasil to himself as he threw books behind him, which took flight and placed themselves back in the bookcase. Urasil turned and gave a frightful yell as he found Erebus standing behind him holding out a book. "Have you tried this one?" asked Erebus. Urasil was taken aback to find the leader of Westgate in his sanctuary, let alone apparently trying to help him search through his books. "A simple yes or no will suffice," continued Erebus, unperturbed, as he turned the book from side to side in front of him. Urasil peered at the book. Yes, I have, now you mention it. I found it in Library 1 only the other day." "Ah, yes, Library 1, where you and your friends agreed to help Requiem find the 5th gate." Urasil looked as though he was about to faint as he watched his leader stroll around his dishevelled library. "You know about that?" he asked weakly. "I'm the leader of Westgate, am I not? It would not do for me to not know what was going on in my own house." "Of course, you have a point, but that does seem a little Big Brother if you ask me." Urasil clamped his hands to his mouth in shock. "What am I saying? I am so sorry, sir." "No need for titles. Erebus is fine, and no need to be sorry. I wouldn't worry. It's not like I'm watching everyone all the time. It's just that the halls do echo so, and you are not the most secretive of people." "Ah." Examining the spine on a book just above head height, Erebus tried to look preoccupied in order to downplay his next move. "I came to ask your opinion." My opinion?" stammered Urasil in surprise. "Yes. As you know, I am a good listener. So tell me, how is everyone faring at this time? Your little group of adventurers, I mean." Well, all things considered, not bad, I would say." Nervous at giving his opinion to his leader, Urasil continued to speak whilst placing books back on the shelves from a stack he had sitting on a table. "Requiem's power is growing at an astonishing rate. He doesn't use it as much as perhaps he could, which shows restraint. Freya has had a few near misses, but comes bouncing back more determined than ever. Gio is generally calm about the whole thing, and I'm learning a great deal. We've all discovered new powers and are generally working well together as a team." Gazing into space, Urasil pondered. "The question is, what are we working towards?" Running his fingers through the dust on the table, Erebus asked, "Indeed. On that matter, what are your thoughts?" Urasil stopped midway through placing a book on the shelf and turned to Erebus with a blank expression. "I don't know. Any chance you could shed some light?" At this jovial attempt at asking for help, Erebus just smiled. Urasil had proven his point with that one simple gesture. They were all sticking together and carrying on, even though they didn't know why. It was simply the bonds of friendship that guided their actions, and that was all that Erebus needed to know. Erebus looked up. Stained glass. Enchanting, isn't it? The story some of them tell in the greatest of cathedrals to the smallest of churches. Marvellous. Urasil looked up at his stained glass window, portraying a knight in a green field of rolling hills. Wrinkling his nose, Urasil tried to decipher what Erebus had just said. When he finally plucked up the courage to look over and ask, Erebus had vanished.